and maintenance. And we've never really had one because up until now, we've never really had any really major replacements to do. I think the gas furnaces dying was the first thing. And actually, Building and Grounds Committee that I'm on, and several of us are, Marie is, have been struggling for several years to figure out if we could do one ourselves, sort of do-it-yourself kit, and we couldn't figure out how to do that. We didn't have enough data about what things would cost to be replaced and a bunch of other questions. And really, we have sort of a limited fund now for reserve funding. The only problem is, with all due respect, it's been so borrowed from that the current account is about $15,000, which I'm not being critical of anybody. That was just sort of the way things happened. Next slide, Marie.
So we needed to do this now because even though we refer to this as the new church, it's still 30 years old. And all the components are kind of getting worn down and tired. And one reason that we needed to have the study done is because over the last 30 years, things have been done, components have been added, and records weren't really kept that great. Or an individual had them at their house and forgot. So we didn't even really know what all components that we had. We needed a professional to come in and know exactly what it was that he needed to look at. He knew how much things would cost and how long things usually last.
And let me just add one thing. I think Sally's fault, really, that we got one now, because she read a textbook about reserve studies, and she convinced Reverend Mary to put in the funding last year.
That's Marie, not Sally.
Marie, my apology. And so a study was done last year. And next slide, please, Sally.
Well, I did want to mention that
Go ahead,
thing
I'm
that really
sorry.
lit a fire under me after being appointed newly the facilities manager, the collapse of the building in Florida really had an impact on me. We're nowhere near that, but we need to start thinking about things, looking at things, and planning ahead now so that we can maintain our facility for 30 more years to come.
Sally, next slide.
We focused on capital expenses, so the report that was done didn't have really anything to do with the day-to-day operations. And so a good example of that is if you look up at our skylights, you can see that, they need a little scrubbing. And that's a day-to-day maintenance expense. If they started leaking and we had to replace them all, that would be a capital expenditure. So we really focused on capital expenditures. What's it going to cost to maintain this building over the long term? Because we know stuff breaks. Next slide. So reserve funds aren't something to deal with in the future. We kind of learned that lesson the hard way this year as people wore sweaters and jackets and boots and brought vests and brought heaters in because we really weren't focused on the fact that some of our components were really old. And to use a trade term, they were functionally obsolete as well, which meant that when it came time to, they're broken, now what do we do? They couldn't find parts because they're old. So we wanted to be prepared, and because things wear out over time. Right now, one of the things that the study, not you, Ginny, one of the things that the study found was, as Dawn mentioned, right now the money that has been set aside for long-term capital repairs is woefully inadequate, really, for what we know is coming down the road. I mean, the other thing you think about when you look up is we got a roof over this, and at some point, it's a metal roof, it's going to last 50 years, hopefully, but that's only 20 more years, and at some point we're going to have to replace it. So one of the things they discovered was that the reserves were only at 2.4% of what they should be. Next slide.
Marie,
Oh, okay. So here's some numbers that we have. The original structure was built in 1994. The addition was built in 2010. The church is approximately 10,000 square feet, and there's 34,720 square feet of asphalt with 5,820 of concrete. So that'd be the sidewalks and stairs versus the asphalt for the parking lot. We have 730 feet for the fence, which I assume is this fence and not counting the fence around the stormwater, which is also very important. And the property has 3 lots containing 3.9 acres. So we actually have quite a bit of land, quite a bit of trees, and a lot of things that we need to take care of.
next slide.
So when the guy from the Reserve Associates came by, we walked around the site, outside and inside. He checked out the stairs, asphalt, dumpster enclosure, and inside things like, for the exterior, things like the roof and the skylights, which she mentioned, gutters, downspouts. For the building interior, we looked at the walls, the doors, the windows, the youth rooms. There's a number of classrooms, hallways, AV equipment, appliances, and there's building systems like the hot water heaters, heat pumps and air handlers, furnaces, the security access for the front door, and there's a number of fire alarm panels that are required that we also will need to maintain and replace as time goes on.
Next slide, Sally.
This slide is, believe it or not, a consolidation. This is like a one-page at a glance. These are all the components that Marie just mentioned. We've got site and grounds and building exteriors and building interiors and systems. And right, those components total $1.2 million.
In today's dollars.
In today's dollars, that's right. And also an important point, this is a particular point in time. So this was, I think the study was completed in August of 22. So some things, this is a living, breathing project because things change. We change from gas-fired furnaces to heat pumps. So those are the kinds of things that will be reflected and will need to be reflected as we try to keep on top of how old are our components, what needs to be fixed next, et cetera.
And I think people forget how many components there can actually be in and outside of a building. The completed reserve study that we got was approximately 100 pages long.
Yes, actually.
And this is one page.
It's this, double-sided. I mean, you know, so there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data.
Everywhere you look, there's more components that will need to be replaced.
Next slide. And we could point out on the way, too, that the consultant's figures don't include sales tax. So that's another
Almost 10%.
minus 10%. Sally.
Inflation.
So this is the, again, a consolidation. This was our one-page summary of the components. And we have, at that point, again, point in time, we had about $350,000 worth of components of stuff that had no life left. In other words, it needs to be replaced. It's either already died or it's going to die. And those are summarized here. So for example, in the zero life left category, we have the site stairs. When you walk out today, notice that the stairs are starting to break down and the concrete's starting to go. We've got a bunch of asphalt problems. We've got what's called alligatoring, and Building and Grounds have detected that the land is starting to subside underneath those, at that alligatoring and underneath the grates, because it's time, it's rain, it's the fact that we haven't seal coated. We also have trees that need to be dealt with. A number of them have already been flagged. And the stormwater pond only lasts so long. So these are just, you know, a few of the things that are in that $350,000 number.
We'll get to the questions at the end.
Hold that thought.
Hold the thought.
For
And-
something like the parking lot, though, I wanted to mention, the lower parking lot's newer, and it needs to be resealed. And if we reseal it sooner than later, we'll be able to extend its lifetime. Whereas the one up here is pretty messed up and will need to be teared up, and we don't know what's underneath.
We waited kind of a long time.
So we want to
anyway-
take care of the lower parking lot before anything bad happens.
So again, as Don pointed out, these costs are today's dollars, are really August of $22. And each project has its own page in the report, and that report is on our website, so you can take a look at it. And Building Grounds and other people in the task force are looking at those and evaluating. And again, it's a living document. It's something that's going to morph over time.
Yeah, when we remove the gas furnaces from upstairs, we'll take them off of our study, and we'll add in the new HVAC system and give it whatever its lifespan is, 30 years thereabouts.
Probably.
Time for us to earn the money to replace them.
Next slide.
And so, another cost, you wonder why would we put tree removal? To have an arborist come and review take down one of the big firs out front that's dying, cost about $5,000. By the time he comes and goes up and cuts the top, cuts it up, chips the branches and leaves the firewood, he sends us a bill for around $5,000.
And I want to interject here, because that's a salient point, that one of the other things that defines operating expenses versus capital expenses, and again, we're focused on capital expenses, is operating expenses are things that you can handle in the day-to-day, your day-to-day budget. You know, we have a maintenance budget. But once it gets to the point, and, you know, a common threshold is $5,000, another common threshold is between 0.05 and 1% of the total budget. So once it gets over that number, you got to think of it as being a capital project, because it's just not something that you're going to be able to take care of in your regular maintenance budget. Sorry to interrupt.
No
Go ahead.
problem. And so the next steps, the task force has been reviewing the consultant's study that was finished in August. Building and Grounds has reviewed it, and I think we don't buy 100% of it, but we think it's a very meaningful, significant indication of the kind of money we're going to have to come up with over the years. So one charge the board gave the task force was to engage with the congregation, discuss amongst ourselves, work with Building and Grounds, and come up with a proposed plan for funding this over the long term. And we're not going to get that answer today. We want you to begin to think about it because it is a significant amount. We don't need it all tomorrow, but we're going to need it when we need it. So anyway, at this point, we've finished our presentation. We'll be glad to answer any questions you want. And I think we have to, if somebody raises a hand, we have to run out and give them a mic so that they can be online.
I can do that.
And so anybody got questions, raise your hand.
Hello. Back to the list of zero life left, of that 347,000, is the HVAC gas furnace replacement part of that number?
I don't think it is. It is, thank you.
Thank you.
It's down here. Furnace gas replace, $90,000.
But that's to replace the furnace that's gas. We're-
We changed direction, so we actually added money to the zero life left to reflect the fact that not only were we replacing the things that were old, but it was going to take more money because we were taking a different path.
The amount that's put down in the reserve study is, sorry, my brain just went off. How much we need to save in order to replace the existing equipment. So since we're changing what the equipment is, it's going to be more than the original
right.
furnaces.
And we raised that money in the capital campaign.
We did,
And
yes.
thanks to George, too.
And a lot of that is going to help, along with one of our congregants, George Lanning, bless his heart, who passed away and gave the congregation a very healthy chunk of change. That will replace the gas furnaces with heat pumps, I think, pretty much. But it's sort of a gray area between what the capital campaign raised versus what George Lanning estate donated.
And what we were really focused on is just, at this point anyway, is what does the building need? What do we have here right now? how many more years can we expect for it to last, and how do we plan? The next part really is about the funding and things like generous contributions, capital campaigns, or monthly contributions. You know, that part is next. You got to pay for it.
Mark?
Thank you. Great report. So I don't know if this question belongs in administrative or in facility development, but is there any components, security or alert systems that are built into the maintenance of buildings, fire, dangerous situations on premise, that type of thing?
I believe there is funding for
Is it part of the
updating
plan?
what is here. Reverend Mary can maybe able to answer quickly. Give her the mic, give her a mic.
Thanks, Lee. So Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, annual fire maintenance, our fire system maintenance is part of the operating budget. That's
Correct.
something we can
Yeah.
anticipate every single year. And, you know, Marie handles that, it's part of the budget, checking the security system. Yeah, testing, making sure the sprinklers work. Do they test the sprinklers? They test
There's
the,
more than one test for the sprinklers. There's about 4 or 5 tests a year just for the fire.
right. So that's the security piece. And was there more that you were wondering about, or?
Concerned about ambulances coming into the facility should somebody have a heart attack during service.
You're concerned about,
Emergency vehicles have access, easy access to the facility, road condition, I think.
oh, Leah's concerned about ambulances being able to get into the parking lot in the building if needed?
Yeah, especially during services, the lower gate is open. But it would be a good idea, side note, if someone calls just to, you know, if the lower gate's closed, say use the upper parking lot.
Right. I mean, I'm guessing they wouldn't let us build a building and parking lot that there couldn't be ambulance access if it's a
Yeah.
public building, yeah.
And
so-
I've had to call the cops a couple times, and they've been here and
yeah.
got here just fine.
Yeah, so once again, that's the difference between operating and capital. You know, the stuff we can anticipate every year, that goes in the regular operating budget, and that's what we're doing with the stewardship campaign right now. That's the predictable annual stuff that we know is coming every single year.
More questions?
Arvin, are you seeing the ones online? Or
I
in
don't
chat?
have a question, really. I just want to say thank you. I think that this is just so important to plan so that we can all plan as to how we can give in our lives too. Because if we know what's coming up, we know what we need to do, then it's easier for me to put that
Yeah.
in my budget. So thanks so much. It's a great report.
And being able to plan will, you know, protect the legacy of this church.
My question is about our solar panels. How are they doing, and are they doing a great job of generating electricity to pay for our heat pumps?
They're
Marie?
doing a good job at it. There's been some inverter issues that we've had over the years, and Joe Joy's been looking into some things with the solar panels. I'm not quite sure where we're at with all of that. But they have been working and bringing in electricity, and when the power company was still doing it, you know, we were getting money. Because we were giving electricity out back to the system.
Our techie
That
thought-
program has stopped.
Sure, next.
Say it out loud, Carmel, or should we just read your chat? You're muted, so.
You can just read it.
Okay. All right, Carmel asked, what are the priority projects for the zero building replacement, the things that have zero life left in them? And part two, in other words, what will the capital funds just raised pay for over the next few years?
It's sort of a bit of a gray area. The capital fund drive will pay for some of them that occur in the short term. But, and so they really, arguably, if we had the reserve fund in place before, so a certain amount of money would have been, from the capital drive would have been put in the reserve fund, but it really wasn't officially there yet. But I think the treasurer and the board and with our help in building and grounds is sort of trying to decide, and Reverend Mary's input, trying to decide what should be done. And I think fixing the pavement is probably the highest thing, simply because not only does inflation affect it, but it gets older. And the more pervious it is, the more
longer
water
we-
gets in it, the more it freezes, and the more
Right, the longer we
price
wait,
goes up.
the more expensive it is to fix, is the upshot. So that's definitely going to be, that's at the top of the list.
And ultimately, we decide what our priorities are. We decided we wanted heat and ventilation, so we're going to do that first.
Right.
If we decided the parking lot was more important, we would have done that first. So it's just what you guys are going to decide, basically.
Any more questions? Any more questions online?
I'm not seeing any.
Thank you. One person over there would like to have a mic. I know her. She used to be on Building and Grounds. I remember helping.
Thank you so
Nice
much for,
stuff.
for all your help and work on this. It's just so appreciated. And so I was wondering, where are we in the stage of replacing the furnace situation? I'm not, it seems warmer in here today, but I just wondered, where are we? Are we finished with it? So we have new heat pumps and the new furnace now, or are we still working on that?
I'll let Marie and Reverend Mary answer that question.
Contracts have been signed, orders have been put in. It's about 3 months to get the equipment. And during that time, they'll be doing electrical design, and we can start working on other things. There's heat right now because we do have one operating furnace for the sanctuary.
Thanks for the question. And I would thank you, Marie. And I would just add to that, Marie does a really good job of monitoring things in the sanctuary, both the air quality, because it's the furnace that circulates the air, right? And boy, we are all about air quality these days. And, you know, heat and those kinds of things. So thank you, Marie, for your care. And, you know, as Marie said, there's a 3-month lead time. They ordered, our contractor ordered the heat pumps in February, so we're in, you know, a month in or so. We also learned that we will need to replace ductwork in order to accommodate the air power of the heat pumps. And so the ductwork is going to be different, so it's going to cost more in order for that to happen. And we also learned that we'll be out of the sanctuary for a couple of Sundays in order for that to happen. So, you know, I just want to hold up that the commitment, you know, the commitment of this congregation is to be as green as possible. It would be easy and less expensive to replace gas furnaces with gas furnaces, and that's not what we're doing. We are absolutely committed to better, you know, environmentally better, long-term, you know, investment better to have heat pumps, and it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice in the short term for that to happen. So thank you all. And I want to add my thanks to the Reserve Study Task Force just for the work, and yeah, just great.
And I want to add to that the thanks to the Building and Grounds Committee that really, in the beginning, began to be concerned about what we needed to do. And to Marie, who sort of got religion, pardon my French, and really pushed Reverend Mary to have something done.
I wanted to say something about heat pumps. If you're paying any attention at all, you know that the worldwide demand for heat pumps is enormous right now. And so to try to keep up with demand has been significant. And so I'm sure we're feeling the effects of that.
Oh, we had a comment from online just thanking you for the presentation.
Oh, good, thank you.
I guess one more thing to say about, like, you know, getting new air ducts and all that is it seems kind of shocking to have to spend more money, but we're planning ahead for the next 30 years. Hopefully we won't have to replace them for a while, and this way we'll be able to grow as a congregation and still have good ventilation and heating, and now cooling. That's pretty exciting.
We have a hand up online.
I think you can unmute if you want, Carmel.
Okay. Hello, you hear me?
I think they're here. Go
Okay,
for it.
so I was, you decide, and I kind of thought, who decides? I'm not certainly qualified to decide what projects get done when, and I believe the grounds and maintenance folks have the most experience with this, and I trust them to make those priority recommendations and to take this study further along with the study participants, because I think you've taken us really down the right track, and I trust that you will do the right thing. And I'm want to thank you and empower you to go a little further. Thanks.
But I think we have to realize that there's relatively few of us in this room or even online at this moment. So I think we see, because the church has never had a reserve fund big time like we think is needed, we need to spend more time making sure everybody is more or less on board. I think the Building and Grounds and Reverend Mary and the board are more than willing to make the hard decisions when the time comes, but we need to have people understand why this is so important.
Yes, I wanted to add that it is the board that decides what project gets done next.
Yes.
And Reverend Mary got a lot of input from Marie and Buildings and Grounds and our financial team on, so we had a lot of experts to help us decide to authorize funding for instance, to start funding the replacement of the furnaces.
Yes. Thank you. One more from what?
From online.
They're ready for you, Mark.
Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So we just launched a new capital campaign. I don't recall the sum that we're seeking to raise. Is that going to be 1.2 million? Are we looking at future shortfalls in just terms of gathering money and collecting money and spending money? How does that picture look?
Mary can probably answer that question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mark. So the Capital Campaign Committee kicked off in November, December timeframe. The campaign is ongoing. Folks can still contribute to that. The bulk of the contributions have come in. And the campaign was about $30,000 short, 33 somewhere in there. And so part of the work of the board, with the advice of Buildings and Grounds and the reserve study, and in consultation with me, will be to decide how do we distribute that money. It was collected for three things. The capital campaign was for three things: replacing the gas furnaces with heat pumps. George's contribution will cover most of that, we expect, and maybe some left, to help pay down or pay off the mortgage, and to replenish the reserve fund. So the board will decide then how the money gets distributed across those three things. And the amount of the request, Mark, was not 1.2 million. And, I'll just say there are other congregations that do reserve studies, as Darlene has gone out and, consulted about what does that look like. The really hard part for churches isn't getting the study done, it's funding it.
Yeah.
And, condos can collect dues and have $1 million sitting in a reserve somewhere. Churches don't have that authority. And having $1 million sitting somewhere isn't going to serve the congregation very well. What I say is it doesn't do any good if we have a beautiful, well cared for building if no people are here. We need both sides of things.
Yeah.
And so really that's the conversation and the balance that the board will be making with the input of lots of folks, including the expert from the reserve study. So the amount of the capital campaign was a little over $500,000, and George Lanning had already given half of that. So it was what, 260, somewhere in there, 260,000. Yeah. Yep, 269, Jeff says. So does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes. Thank you, Reverend Mary.
So to add, we don't need the 1 million today. The concern I have as a member of the Building and Grounds is that we do have the money we and the board and Reverend Mary decide we need when we need it. And that's been the real challenge in the past. Well, so that's one of our main concerns, is to decide how we can raise the money and have it when we need it, not have it for years in advance of when we don't need it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.